Welcome back to the second portion of the lecture preview. I believe this is where we left off. But now we're going to begin talking about the different types of epithelium. So, simple epithelium, remember, simple epithelium just means a single layer of cells. So, we can divide this up into the following different categories: simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and pseudostratified columnar, non ciliated and ciliated forms. Okay. Whenever we talk about simple squamous epithelium, again, it's a single layer of flat or tile-shaped cells. We know this by the nomenclature. If you remember the rules for the nomenclature, if it's simple, it means a single layer. If it's stratified, it means multiple layers. And then based on the shape size or the shape of the cell. If the nucleus is centrally located, it'll be the same thing for simple squamous and simple cuboidal. Both of them will have centrally located nucleus. And if you guys can remember that pseudostratified do not have a centrally located nucleus. This is going to be found at sites for filtration or diffusion. As you can see here, this is a cross-section of the small intestine like we previously discussed. This is going to be a single layer of these tile-shaped cells. This is present within the small intestine. This is going to be important for the diffusion of nutrients across the membrane. Again, this is the same thing that we just discussed. And this is where we actually left off. So simple squamous epithelium. Simple squamous epithelium is going to be responsible for forming two unique types of linings. You have endothelium and mesothelium. So whenever you think about endothelium, I want you to think about the inside lining of a blood vessel. Okay, these are two important points to know. Simple squamous epithelium makes up two unique linings: the endothelium, which is going to be pretty much the inside of the lumen of the blood vessel, and the mesothelium. And for mesothelium, this is a type of epithelial layer of serous membranes. So serous membranes, such as the pericardium, the pleura, or the peritoneum. Primarily, I want you to know the pleura. The pleura is going to be this layer that is going to be we're going to discuss later on with the lungs. The pleura. So endothelium and mesothelium. It's also important to know that, unlike any other epithelial tissue, the mesothelium and the endothelium are derived from the embryonic mesoderm. So if you guys remember, I talked about the mesoderm being the middle layer. This is the means of travel. So how things travel, it makes sense that the endothelium would make up the blood vessels, inside lining of the blood vessels. And it makes sense that they derive from the mesoderm because remember, the mesoderm is the means of travel. So there's a note here: simple squamous epithelium is not found in regions that are subject to mechanical wear and tear. And that makes sense because these regions would break down very easily. Simple cuboidal epithelium, the name as it implies, it's a single layer of cube-shaped cells. Again, the cell nuclei are going to be centrally located. These are going to function in secretion and absorption. And this is an important point to note: secretion and absorption. So whenever I think about organs that are responsible for secretion, the thyroid gland secretes thyroid hormone. The pancreas will secrete insulin and another hormone called glucagon. And the kidneys will be responsible for absorption. And they'll also be responsible for secretion of different electrolytes. So again, simple cuboidal epithelium, single layer of cube-shaped cells that have centrally located nuclei. They're going to be responsible for secretion and absorption. And you think about glands such as the thyroid, the pancreas, and the kidneys. Here is a cross-section here. You can see this single layer of cube-shaped cells with the centrally located nucleus. This is another cross-section, a simple cuboidal epithelium here. You can see the centrally located nuclei. This is a lumen of a duct here. This is the nucleus and the underlying connective tissue, and this will be the basement membrane here. This is the cross-section of the pancreas. Here, another picture of just, this is the lumen here. This is the actual cuboidal shaped cell. You can see it's not square shaped like the squamous epithelium. Simple columnar epithelium. It's going to be a single layer of column shaped cells. These don't have the centrally located nuclei. They have oval nuclei at the basal end, so at the opposite of the apical end. Remember, the apical end um, faces the free surface. The basal end is towards the basement membrane. So these have oval-shaped nucleus that are close to the basal end. Of importance to note here is the presence of non-ciliated and ciliated epithelium. So remember, we talked about cilia having this flagella-like motion. It can function to process materials out of the body. So this would be important to be in areas like the trachea, where particles can get in, and the cilia can be responsible for um, passing them into the pharynx and other areas. Microvilli will be present to increase the surface area for absorption. Again, this is an area of the small intestine where you're going to have this non-ciliated end, simple columnar epithelium here. Here's the nucleus, and here's the presence of something called goblet cells. Goblet cells are going to be responsible for secretion of mucus. We'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. Here's another cross-section that you can see here. Microvilli being present at the top, being responsible for the absorption of material coming in. Here's the mucus of the goblet cells. The goblet cells will be responsible for secretion of that. This is the basement membrane. Again, just another cross-sectional picture. So this is non-ciliated, simple columnar epithelium. So again, single layer of column-shaped cells containing both microvilli and goblet cells. Microvilli being responsible for the absorption of material, and the goblet cells being responsible for the secretion of mucus. So why do they secrete this mucus? Well, it can serve as a lubricant for the lining of the digestive, respiratory, reproductive, or urinary tract. Within the respiratory tract, it secretes mucus, which can trap particles and can trap these particles and allow for these particles to be properly dealt with. Just another picture of this non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium here. Here's another picture here showing you where the goblet cells are. These are the goblet cells which are going to be present. This is a picture of an areolar cross-section. Here's the areolar tissue with the basement membrane being present here. Goblet cells being responsible for the secretion of this mucus. And this is the actual lumen of the duct. So when we think about ciliated, simple columnar epithelium, you think about the respiratory tract. So columnar epithelium cells with cells at the apical surface, so cells facing the free surface. In the respiratory tract, goblet cells are going to be spread out. They beat the cilia, or these little tiny projections are going to be responsible for beating. And they're going to move materials into the throat for removal by coughing, swallowing, or sneezing. There is a process in which smoking can cause metaplasia, and this is just the changing of epithelium. So this is a predisposition to cancer. So metaplasia is the reversible replacement of one differentiated cell type with another mature differentiated cell type. Here I list the example in the trachea. In the trachea, ciliated simple columnar epithelium can be transformed into squamous epithelium in response to smoking. So the cell undergoes genetic changes in order to deal with the irritants from the smoke. This is called metaplasia. It changes from one cell type to another, and that's important to note. The text says here, this causes you to cough up phlegm as you have lost your cilia that normally moves it out of the airway. This is also known as a smoker's cough. Just something to be aware of. Here's just some other pictures, some other cross-sectional pictures of the ciliated simple columnar epithelium. We'll get into pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Again, pseudo meaning fake, so fake stratification. So this is just going to appear to have several different layers. The nuclei they're never going to come to the apical surface. They're going to be interspersed throughout. All cells are attached to the basement membrane in a single layer, but some do not extend to the apical surface, like we previously just said. So it's just these cells who have this tall appearance, but the nuclei don't extend to the apical surface. There's ciliated cells, these secrete mucus and bear cilia, and the non-ciliated cells like cilia and goblet cells. This is a cross-section of the trachea and the respiratory tract. This is, like we previously just said, having this very tall appearance here. The nuclei are in different areas. Some are closer to the basal layer, and some are closer to the apical surface, but they don't quite reach there. This is the goblet cell. The goblet cell is going to be able to secrete this mucus. And again, this is present primarily in the respiratory tract. Now getting into the stratified epithelium, this is a specific kind of stratified epithelium, and it depends on the shape of the cell. Again, stratified just means 2 or more layers. So it can be stratified squamous, which is primarily what we're going to deal with. Stratified cuboidal and columnar are going to be relatively rare. We won't discuss those in much detail, but stratified squamous is of particular importance. And then we'll talk about this transitional epithelium, as it'll be primarily present only the urinary bladder. So stratified squamous epithelium, this is going to be 2 layers of tile or floor square-like cells. This is going to contain several layers that are flat in the apical layer. It says here that new cells are pushed upward towards the apical layer and have the stratified appearance. So there's 2 different forms: keratinized, which means they contain this fibrous protein called keratin. This is going to be found more in the superficial layers of the skin, so in the outside layer of the skin. So the non-keratinized forms do not contain the keratin. So there's 2 different types of stratified squamous. We said that stratified squamous epithelium is 2 layers of this tile-shaped like square epithelium. There's keratinized and non-keratinized. Keratinized contains keratin. It's going to be found in the superficial layers of the skin, and non-keratinized is found in other layers such as the mouth and the esophagus. And this keratin, all that is a fibrous structural protein. So here, this is just a picture of the stratified squamous epithelium. This is the underlying connective tissue with the vascular supply coming here. The basement membrane overlying the connective tissue. And these are just multiple layers of this tile-shaped area here. Stratified cuboidal, again, we're not going to mention much about it because it's relatively rare, but again, 2 layers of cuboidal shaped cells, primarily going to function in protection. Stratified columnar, again, also very uncommon. Columnar cells are going to be in the apical layer only. Stratified columnar epithelium are going to be primarily found in places like the uterus, some parts of the anus, the eye, the male urethra, and parts of the pharynx. Again, this is just another picture here showing you the underlying connective tissue, showing you the basement membrane, showing you that there's multiple layers of these column-like shaped cells, and this is the apical surface here. This is just a cross-section of the esophagus. The upper third of the esophagus is made of this stratified squamous epithelium, the non-keratinized form, and the lower 1/3 is made up of this stratified columnar epithelium. So transitional epithelium is a type of tissue. Again, we talked about it having this transitional shape. It has multiple layers of epithelial cells which function to contract and expand, and I think that's pretty important to know. This transitional epithelium transitions so it can contract and expand. It's primarily only found in the urinary system, and I think that's important for you to know. Here's a picture of this urinary bladder cross-section. You can see the lumen of the urinary bladder. You can see the nucleus of the transitional cells being present here and dispersed throughout. And as you can see here, it has no clear shape. It's like it's in transition. Just another picture. So when we talk about glandular epithelium, we think about endocrine glands. So the function of this glandular epithelium is secretion. It's going to be secretion of things called hormones. So hormones are going to fuse directly into the bloodstream and pretty much migrate throughout the rest of the body. And eventually they'll reach something called their target cell. This is where they will have an interaction, undergo a chemical message, and produce that hormone. Its functions of maintaining homeostasis. Remember that maintenance of that internal environment in order to keep the body properly working. Endocrine glands are responsible for the secretion of these hormones into something called the interstitial fluid. This interstitial fluid will take these hormones and move them directly into the bloodstream without flowing through a duct. Whenever it flows through a duct, we're going to call that an exocrine gland. As you can see here, this is just a picture of the thyroid gland. This is a thyroid follicle, and this is going to be made up of glandular epithelium. You can see here's an interstitial cell, and this is a blood vessel. The hormone's going to go through this interstitial cell directly into the blood vessel, and it doesn't require a duct. Whenever you think about a duct system, I want you to think about an exocrine gland. An exocrine gland secretes products into ducts. Remember, the endocrine gland secretes it through the interstitial cells into the interstitial fluid, which goes directly into the blood, as you can see here with this interstitial cell into the blood vessel. Whereas the exocrine glands are going to secrete their products into ducts. These ducts are going to empty onto the surfaces of the epithelium. These can cause the secretion of exocrine glands include mucus, sweat, oil, earwax, saliva, and digestive enzymes. So there's some examples of exocrine glands. These include that's a big word, sudoriferous sweat glands. So these are the structural classifications of exocrine glands. So it can be a simple gland where the duct doesn't branch, compound gland, which means the duct branches. Tubular glands have tubular secretory parts. Acinar glands have rounded secretory parts. Tubuloacinar have both a tubular and a rounded secretory part. Don't really think it's important for you to know all of these, and just listen to this here for completeness. What I do think is important is the functional classification of the exocrine glands. You can have a merocrine, apocrine, or holocrine gland. The merocrine glands are going to be responsible for secreting their secretions, and they're going to be transported from the Golgi into a foremost secretory vesicle, and they're released. So most of our exocrine glands are going to be merocrine. I'll have listed here the salivary and the pancreatic glands. Apocrine glands are going to accumulate their secreted products at the apical portion of the cell, and then they're going to pinch this portion off into the cell. An example of this would be the mammary glands. The holocrine glands are going to be sweat glands. These are going to accumulate their secreted products in the cytosol. As the secretory cell matures, it ruptures and releases its product. So just knowing the type of just knowing the classification of the gland, a merocrine gland, most of our glands are going to be merocrine in nature. Apocrine, whenever you think about apocrine, think about the mammary glands being present in the breast. When you think about holocrine, I want you to think about the sweat glands and think about the way their products are released. So merocrine is going to go through the Golgi into the secretory vesicles, whereas apocrine are going to accumulate at the apical portion, and then it's going to pinch it off into the cell, whereas holocrine are going to accumulate, and then once the cell ruptures, it releases it into its product. Here's just a picture here of the merocrine secretions going to the Golgi and then going to the secretory vesicle. As you can see here, this is the apocrine, and you can see here the cell is pinching off secretion. And the holocrine, as the cell dies, the secretory products are then released. Here are some videos that I believe would be kind of beneficial. There's also a self-quiz that may also be beneficial for you guys. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.